Oh, Peter, a lonely, lonely soul. If only he'd been born in a century where his condition was understood, where medicine might have found a way to help him feel seen and accepted. But Peter was a product of his time, raised by parents who were very religious, very proud, and woefully unprepared to understand his unique nature. His father, a local priest, and his mother, a devout woman, were overjoyed at his birth, a long-awaited son. But as Peter grew, their joy began to wane, replaced by worry. While other children babbled and laughed, Peter sat quietly, often staring up at the sky in silence, lost in his own world. By the early 19th century, society didn't know what to make of children like Peter, and his difference was quickly seen as a flaw. Other children taunted him, calling him a fool, and soon, whispers spread through the town that he was a punishment from God. His parents felt the shame keenly, and in time, they too distanced themselves from their son, who had once been their pride. In his isolation, Peter found solace in observing the world around him and channeling what he saw into art. His paintings were unlike anything people had seen those days, vivid, bursting with color, depicting a beauty and liveliness that unsettled his puritanical parents. To them, his talent was obvious, but his art was unnatural, even rebellious, and they hoped to stifle it by sending him to a school for artists, thinking it would correct him. To Peter, the new place felt like a prison. His teachers forced him to paint somber, lifeless subjects, stripping his work of color and joy. Each brushstroke in gray and black felt like a betrayal of his own vision, a vision that no one else seemed to understand. With time, Peter grew resigned. He abandoned his bright colors and withdrew from everyone around him, his spirit as gray as the lifeless canvases he was forced to create. Years passed, and in his final year of school, tragedy struck. Peter's parents died in a fire that consumed their family home. Despite the sad news, Peter didn't experience a sense of loss. And can we really blame him for not feeling sorrow? Deep down, he even felt a kind of relief, and if he'd had a friend in the world, he might have shared this unusual reaction. But there wasn't a soul he could trust, and, having never known happiness or how to express it, he appeared indifferent to others in the face of his parents' death. Left alone with only a small inheritance, Peter returned to his hometown, rented a tiny attic room, and bought paint. Free from the watchful eyes of teachers and parents, he finally painted as he wished. For the first time, he felt alive, spending his days capturing the world as he saw it, vivid, intense, and full of color. He roamed the town with his canvas, portraying its architecture and nature with the joy he had long suppressed. Though the townspeople still whispered about him, he didn't care. So, they left him alone at some point. Peter was happy, or as close to happy as he could be. One evening, as Peter was adding the final touches to a painting on a quiet street corner, a stranger approached. The man's presence was striking. He was impeccably dressed and carried an air of calm authority that seemed almost otherworldly, a rare sight in this small, unremarkable town. Peter assumed he was a passing traveler and with a nod showed him his work. The stranger's gaze lingered, intense and thoughtful, as though he saw beyond the colors and strokes, glimpsing something deeper. "My name is Gabriel," he introduced himself, his voice gentle but resonant, removing his hat with a graceful nod. "I represent a collector who seeks the exceptional. Your art," he paused, his eyes holding a glimmer of admiration, "is truly remarkable." Peter inclined his head, unsure how to respond. "I would like to commission you for a series of 7 paintings," Gabriel continued. "Paint scenes of the town, It's houses, streets, and landscapes, anything that inspires you. There are only two conditions. You must use the paints we provide, and you must avoid including other people in your paintings. Your work should feel timeless. Otherwise, it risks being tied to a specific era. Peter looked at him, puzzled. "What's special about these paints?" he asked. Gabriel smiled. "They are a touch more vivid than what you might be used to." Peter's curiosity was piqued. He thought he had seen the brightest colors available, but these paints intrigued him. With a smile, he accepted the offer, shaking Gabriel's hand. Peter opened his bag, intending to show the stranger some of his other works, but when he looked up, Gabriel had mysteriously vanished. The next morning, a large box arrived, filled with paints, brushes, and canvases. Peter eagerly opened the paints, mixed the colors, and made his first brush stroke. The colors seemed richer, deeper, alive almost. Excited, he packed his supplies and set off to paint his favorite spot by the river. The day was cool and gray, and he found a quiet, abandoned spot by the promenade. As he painted, he didn't notice anything unusual at first, but as he stepped back to view his work, he felt a shock. The scene before him was moving. The river's waters shimmered, a bird flapped its wings mid-flight, and leaves rustled as if touched by a breeze. The colors pulsed with life. Bewildered, Peter added a small detail, a sleeping cat. The cat curled up under a tree, then stretched and yawned, just like a real cat. His work had come alive, captured not as a mere image, but as a living scene. "What in heaven's name?" came the slurred voice of a drunken shoemaker behind him. Peter jumped, quickly covering the painting. "Nothing to see here," he stammered. "But it was moving," the shoemaker slurred, eyes wide. Peter forced a laugh. "Maybe you've had a bit too much to drink today." That night, safe in his room, Peter looked at his painting again. The river still flowed. The cat wasn't sleeping anymore, but was climbing the tree. His art was alive, just as he saw it in his mind, a kind of magic he couldn't understand. Who was this Gabriel really, and why did he need these enchanted pictures? Peter couldn't find answers to these questions, but he knew he had to be careful. If others saw his paintings, he might be accused of witchcraft. He resolved to paint in secret, leaving only at night to capture the town's quiet beauty under moonlight. For a week, Peter roamed the silent streets, painting by starlight. The scenes sprang to life, brighter and more vivid than any he'd created before. By the week's end, he had completed 6 of the 7 paintings. Only one remained, and Peter wandered through the town in the daylight, searching for the perfect location for his final painting. The world around him felt gray and unwelcoming. People looked at him with a sense of hidden judgment, making it difficult for Peter to focus on the town's inner beauty, to see life through the vibrant lens he had come to love. The artist grew despondent. Completing his last painting meant he would no longer be able to use the magical paints. It meant returning to his usual style, which now seemed so dull, despite its unique approach and originality. And then, a thought struck him. Gabriel had said he couldn't paint other people, but he hadn't forbidden Peter from painting himself. What if he painted a self-portrait? Would he, too, come alive on the canvas? That could be the solution to everything. How would it feel to live in a magical, colorful world permanently? No more judgments, no more fears, no more bullying. After all, there was nothing tying Peter to this world or life. No family or friends to leave behind. Not a single soul who would miss him here. That night, Peter set up his easel by his window and painted the view outside. Once the background was finished, he placed a mirror beside the canvas and began painting himself, his own reflection gazing out of the picture, standing with his back to the town. As he painted, something strange happened. His reflection in the painting began blinking in sync with him, smiling when he smiled. The image seemed more real, almost separate, and it filled him with excitement. Yet he remained there, rooted in the present, unable to cross into the world he had painted. Peter slumped in frustration, staring at the canvas, wondering why he couldn't step inside. By chance, his palette slipped, and a splash of paint hit his clothes. He started to brush it off, but something extraordinary happened. The part of him where the paint had dropped began to disappear, replaced by a matching splash on his painted self. His painted double moved on its own, wiping away the paint, independent from Peter's real hand. Suddenly, he understood. If he covered himself in the enchanted paint, he might be able to step fully into the canvas. By dawn, nearly every inch of him was painted and vanished, with only his hand and eyes left. But how could he finish the last strokes without being able to see himself? He looked to his painted self, who pointed to the palette and brush, urging him on. With a trembling hand, Peter painted a brush in his double's hand, then painted over his own eyes. His painted hand reached out from the canvas, holding the brush, and completed the final strokes over his hand. As the sun rose, the paintbrush fell, clattering to the floor, and the room fell silent. When the servant girl arrived that morning to bring Peter his breakfast, she found the place empty. All that remained of his presence were a few personal belongings, vibrant sketches of the town, and 7 blank canvases scattered across the empty space where he had once lived.